listening to Truth or Dare to Share by Ambitiously Intuitive.
Welcome to this episode of Truth or Dare to Share, hosted by Ambitiously Intuitive. You've got Lacey and Cynthia here, and we are super excited to be talking about the show and the book, Tell Me Lies. I rewatched it, and I'm stressed out all over again. Just as a reminder for folks who are seeing this for the first time, we've got 3 acts. We've got Act 1, where Cynthia and I will give our reaction. Act 2, where we're going to ask each other questions. And then Act 3, we'll play the game Truth or Dare to Share, personal development style. This is Cynthia's suggestion. I'm glad she suggested it. I'm being stressed out watching it 2 years ago in 2022. Season 2 drops in a week. Hence the timing of this episode was intentional. Cynthia, you're the one who suggested it to me. And I got my fight or flight response going, so I'm going to put you on the spot and have you give your reaction first.
So the first time I watched this show, I actually didn't realize it was a book. So the first time I watched it blind, I thought it was pretty enjoyable with the drama and also the nostalgia of, the 2000s and everything, because that's also when I was in college. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And also I could feel like those emotions that I had also when I was in college. I will say though, watching it a second time, I got the cringe. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that I really enjoyed this the first time. I will say though that I really did enjoy the book. The book, I think, because it's dual perspective and you can sort of feel what they're feeling, that I like them better. I like the characters better. In the show, the characters are very unlikable, I would say. So what did you think, Lacey?
I went on a really deep dive of Reddit last night, and almost every person was saying, you dislike Steven from the get-go, but by the end of the show, you also dislike Lucy. And I was reading some of the differences between the book and the show. I did not get a chance, and I'm debating whether or not I'm going to read the book. But folks on Reddit were also saying that they enjoyed the book because of that dual perspective and more of the psychological aspect that I don't know, I would say that it made them redeemable. The show, again, I had the same thing, the ick factor, and it was funny rewatching it. One of the first things that Pippa says in episode 1 is, are we talking about Steven already? And then when you rewatch it, you just, again, going back to being back in college, you get why Lucy's justifying this behavior, and also Steven and his on and off girlfriend, Diana, how their dynamic is this power dynamic struggle that they have over each other because they see each other as equals to a certain extent from an intellectual level. And I'm cringing for Lucy. I want Steven off my screen every single time he comes on. And I wonder how I would feel about the show had I read her book. I also think it's pretty badass is that I was looking at the folks behind this. It's Emma Roberts who is producing this, their production company. I was looking at the folks who are all involved. It was also a woman who created the show, and then obviously the author, Carola Lovering, who initially wrote it. So I get that they really felt that a story like this needed to come to life because there are countless people. That was the other thing that was all over Reddit, which is essentially what I'm doing right now, is that so many people realize that this younger version of them, at some point or another, went through a toxic relationship. And you watch all of their friends witnessing it and how they can see this other perspective. And the other thing I didn't take into consideration that in the second rewatch is how much Steven and Lucy's decision-making and their toxicity had a ripple effect into everybody else around them. And that's not something I really saw people talking about in this Reddit thread, is the implications of the folks that you're closest to and what it does to you. I gave a lot of information, but I have so much.
I definitely agree with all of that. I think it's really interesting too, their friends and also the magnetic energy that they had towards one another, their chemistry was unbelievable. And I think that this goes to the question, does chemistry equate to a healthy relationship? And I think, do you think that Steven really loved or even really liked any of the women?
That is a great question. I've given this a lot of thought, unsurprisingly. So Katie Sagal plays his mother beautifully, unsurprisingly. Yes. Short answer is no, because Steven doesn't love himself, and I don't believe you can love somebody else more than the relationship that you have to yourself. I think that Steven resented his mother and had issues towards women in general, so he always chose to play the game, and what was he seeking at the end? He's seeking social status. And he's also clearly dealing with abandonment issues from his father leaving. Because even though you're talking about the women right now, one of the episodes that stuck out with me was his relationship to Evan and how pissed off he was that Evan didn't want to live with him anymore. And that you could see him even saying, what do I need to say to address this? And Evan said, sometimes there isn't always something to say. Because Steven doesn't, even though he's a master manipulator, he's so used to talking his way out of things, and you saw him being ineffective with Evan, who could see through him. And then the other piece that stuck out to me was he thought he could manipulate the woman when he was getting the initial interview for the internship role, going to go work for that law firm. And they were connecting at first, right? She says to him, oh my gosh, you're the first person not to name drop the SAT score. And he's like, oh, I promise I won't do that. And they're connecting over all these elements, and she keeps giving him sample court cases. And it's when she brings up Europe, and he ends up sharing later on with Lucy when he has her come to his ex-girlfriend Diana's father's house in New York City, which just was the lack of boundaries and the lines crossed. Just he did it in every single capacity. And he tells her, I've never gotten on a plane. I've never been to Europe. And the girl in the interview says something about Paris, and he doesn't realize what she's talking about would have been par for the course for somebody with Paris. It's been going completely off of whether or not he loves these women, but then psychoanalyzing why he is the way that he is. He can't love them because of the deep attachment issues that he has with his mother. And I think he hates these women, and he's only trying to capture social status because all he cares about is gaining that status and getting that money. And up until that point, that's why he respected Diana. He loved that Lucy loved him, and he loved that he could manipulate her because of her naivete. And then at the end, the girl that he ends up with, spoiler alert, with Lydia, she was able to give him that country club lifestyle to fill the void that he had with him. So if he's still staring at Lucy, and he loves the fact that it's still pissing her off to this day.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think he falls off with Diana in the show, obviously, due to her having been with Wrigley. Like, that is like the end for him. And I think that this goes to, he had her sort of on a pedestal. And because of that, that knocked her down a peg. And so then he's like, I'm done with her.
Well, I psychoanalyzed Steven. I would love to hear you. What's your psychoanalysis? Knowing, again, that we're not therapists or trained medical professionals. From your perspective, what's your psychoanalysis of Lucy?
Well, Lucy is an interesting character because she's so cold in the beginning. Like, that's how, she portrays herself. She's, has a stone cold heart. She breaks up with her college boyfriend, doesn't even care about it. It's just like, it's over. But I think with Steven, she doesn't even like him, right? And the show actually starts with her saying, or with Steven telling her that she doesn't hate him. And I think that that's really interesting because it's like, he is telling her how to feel, right? Or how to think. And she seems so strong and independent, and but yet when Steven and her come together, they're again like magnets, right? Like they just can't separate themselves. And I think that she just gets in this cycle of like she's obsessed with him. Anyway, even when she starts dating, I think his name's Max, the bartender. As soon as she sees Steven, she's like, "Oh, Steven," right? So I think I think that this is also the first time that she is really connecting with someone on some level. And I think that that is also part of why she can't give Steven up.
Yeah, what I was thinking about, and it opens the question about what is somebody's attachment style, which has gotten recent conversation in the last couple of years in the mental health space. She has anxious attachment style. He has avoidant attachment style. So they are these stereotypical, if you don't know what that is, you can watch the show, get stressed out, and see it perfectly on demand because she's dealing still with the loss of her father from his death. And then because at the beginning of the show of season 1, the mom says to her, you know, what happened to my sweet girl? And she clearly has resentment towards her mother. And spoiler alert, you find out later that the mom was apparently potentially cheating on the father, and Lucy was aware of that. So she felt emotionally disconnected and was seeking out something in somebody else. And to your point, she was pretty stone cold when she broke up with her boyfriend of 2 years. And when she's meeting Pippa and Bree and the rest of the girls for the first time, she didn't seem really bothered by the fact that she was ending that relationship. And that chemical dynamic that you were referring to with Steven, I was thinking about, do you remember when I first told you about Matthew Hussey? And I was first learning about this. He was saying there are 4 things you need for a healthy relationship. We talked about this, you, Raquel, and I think I brought it up with Michelle historically, and I'm sure I've said it to Anita and Kenyatta at some point. But one is attraction. They were clearly attracted to each other. You can see when they're on campus, they turn and look at each other. Then the second piece is chemistry, which they had in an insurmountable when it comes to the chemistry dynamic between them. Then the third is commitment, which clearly Steven's not committed to anybody. And you can see that Lucy's asking him to commit, just like how him and Diana had that commitment. And clearly you find out later he was cheating on Diana with Macy. And then the fourth piece is compatibility. And that's different than chemistry. And let's say you even have all 4 of those things, and you still have a healthy relationship. Like that's the starting point. And because commitment, I think, would have had the loyalty, right? Compatibility would have been where I guess like you start, if you know each other's attachment styles, but none of them had any of that. And again, this is college age.
Yeah, I think Evan and Bree would probably be the closest to a healthy relationship. But in the show, Evan sleeps with Lucy, right? So that's sort of like, you know, that doesn't happen in the book. Also, in the book, her dad doesn't die. Her mom has an affair with a tennis instructor. He's a young guy, and she's like Lucy when she's like 14. She's obsessed with this guy, and so she's like in love with him. And so she walks in on her mom with this guy, but her mom doesn't know about it. So, so for what 10? Well, not 10 years, like you know, like 5-ish years. She's holding this in that, you know, with her about her mom and holding the resentment for her mom. So it's just like a different thing. But I think it's a similar situation. She still has that resentment and is holding on about her mom.
This is a perfect segue into Act 2, where my first question for you is what other noticeable differences are there between the book and the show? I'll start there.
So I would say definitely the setting. And then also the way, I feel like in the show, we don't exactly know what the characters are feeling, right? We like don't, like we know sort of, like we see Lucy on the ground.
I'm not going to take offense to that.
We see Lucy like on the ground a lot, on the carpet in her room. And I guess that's like showing a little bit of her emotion. And then we see Steven like sort of pacing, but we don't really know how they're feeling. And so I would definitely say that that is a difference that I think affects how you see the characters. How you were saying earlier about them being likable. Like in the show, I feel like they're not likable at all, especially towards the end. Towards the end, you're like, oh man, they're terrible people, right? That's what Brandon said to me too. He said, why are you watching this show about terrible people? But people make mistakes, right? And that's what this is about. Like they're making mistakes and they're figuring it out and they're learning. So that was one of the big ones. And I would also say, so Macy actually dies in high school, not in college. She's not her roommate. So that's like a major plot change.
So this is another question that I have, which we were talking about just a few minutes ago. And this is a tougher question than the previous one. do you think, based on what they showed between the main characters, Lucy and Steven, and the dynamics with their parents, what do you think is to be learned from what's shown with the issues they have with their parents and why they are the way they are?
Well, I think that those are things that happen to us when we're young. And so we sort of, build on those things, right? Like that's our experience with relationships and, and how you were saying like attachment style, right? So I think that's a really good point about the attachment style. Like, she loves her mom, but she starts calling her mom CJ. And this shows like the separation of mother and child, right? Like she doesn't want to call her mom anymore. I think Steven too, and this is also something different in the book. So Steven's mom is not in the book, so they stay with the dad. And then the mom at the end, she gets like sick and is in the hospital, and then his dad is like all about the mom, like obsessed with her. So I think that this is also interesting because like I think that's like the dynamics of Steven too. Like he is how you were saying avoidant. And I think that this is why, because his dad was like obsessed with mom. And I think in the show, it's the opposite, right? Mom's obsessed with dad, right? The whole Christmas scene where they go to dinner and they go to the restaurant. She chooses it. She actually has Steven choose it because she knows that her ex-husband is going to be there with his new girlfriend or wife or whatever. And so like, I think all of this is playing into who they are as people, but also again, learning experiences, right? They're learning what works for them, what doesn't work for them. I mean, what did you think about that?
I think that whenever I was watching it for a second time and you have the luxury of, I guess, like a baseline perspective that you get to see and pay attention to different details, it makes me think about, I don't know, the different, I don't want to call them self-help because I always think of, do you remember when Charlotte goes to get a self-help book in Sex and the City? And it's like she feels shamed doing it. And so, anytime I read any sort of personal development or psychology book, I think about that negative stigma. And I'm sure I read this in some book in the last couple of years or I've talked about it in therapy that whatever dynamic or what you're talking about, what happens to us when we're little, we're going to continue to relive that cycle, hoping that it will eventually end up the way that we want it to end up. And I think Lucy, we watched her in real time trying to relive somebody ending up choosing her to some extent, and she wanted him to choose her over Diana. And you watch her, and I'm also cringing when she's going down a deep dive of research, like I'm sure a lot of people do. There's an entire episode of How I Met Your Mother dedicated to researching people and how we don't really let, I don't know, we don't let, the internet takes over our ability to give somebody a chance to see who they are outside of who they show themselves to be on the internet. But that's what was difficult for watching Lucy is you know where it's going to end up when you watch it a second time, and maybe not. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people who are much smarter than me who are watching it for the first time and thinking, how do you not see all of these red flags? Like his behavior and his actions don't align. And it makes me think of same thing when they're in New York and she says to him, why don't we ever go to parties together? And she calls him out on the fact that they're never seen in public. And that's when he explains to her, I take you out on actual dates. Does that not mean anything to you? And he's trying to manipulate her and make her feel badly that she's communicating an issue in the relationship. And she never actually addressed this thing with her mother. And she thinks that she has this intimacy with him where she can surface her issues. And she wants to believe what he's saying. And, I remember somebody bring up the concept to me that we can gaslight ourselves. And she was taking his words, and even though he's gaslighting her, and all of her friends can see it, because that's the most open conversation. And one of the things I would say I do love about this is that they all call each other on their bullshit. Same thing. She thinks that earlier on when Pippa is dealing with the details that she knows about Drew and the accident, she says to her, like, are we cool? Because I feel as if you're distant from me. And I do think sometimes we're more likely to have those conversations with our friends because of the deep ties we have with family members. And she's testing the boundaries with Steven and, of course, wants to believe him. And the friends are the whole time, like, there's a separate time with Pippa. That Pippa's like, let's have fun tonight on a separate conversation. She's like, let's have fun tonight because you're not ready for this conversation. We'll do this. I know that was a lot.
Yeah, I was trying to think. Something you said had reminded me of something, and I can't think of what it is now. My brain. Yes, but what was the last part you just said about Steve? What was the question? I'm sorry.
Steven? No, that's okay. I think the question was originally about connecting the dots between the main characters and the parents, and we both pretty much gave our synopsis. I think you focused more on Steven and his mom, and I went into more Lucy and her trying to get and relive what she lacked in her childhood with her first relationship. And then closing that out with, he gaslit her, but she was trying to find connection in all these different places by finally being honest. And that's not the outcome that she ended up with. With him, obviously, and friends were the safer space to that.
I remember what I was going to say. So in the show, right? So she unleashes her whole pent-up thing she had about her mom to Max, who she'd only been with a few times, which is so interesting because it's like someone you don't feel the same connection with, but she must have felt safe with him, right? And because she didn't tell Steven, and she doesn't tell him till the end, which is, I think, also like part of this the attachment dynamic that you were talking about too.
Yeah. So let's pause and unpack Lucy and Max just for a second, because going back to attachment style and how that applies to Max, she finds him boring because Steven brings out her fight or flight response, and she does feel safe with Max, but she's not trying to have an actual relationship with him because she's trying to recreate the drama of her family with Steven and hope that it ends differently. The second thing about Max, and then I'll turn it to you to get your response to it, is I'm not surprised that she did that because yes, she was looking for safety and connection, but I also think when we have unprocessed trauma, that's why we have a tendency to trauma dump. And you're like, okay, this is a safe place. So I guess you can tell me, one, what you think about Max, and two, just what is our position on trauma dumping with people that we don't know?
So first I would say for Max, I think Max is an interesting character too, or I should say he's a calm, and as you were saying, like sort of boring, right? She knows what to anticipate from him. She knows what to expect. And even in the beginning, right, she's with him and then she's having a dream about Steven. So I think that's also like, oh man, like what's going on here? Because it's like, are you happy, or are you dreaming about Steven and you don't actually hate him, or do you actually hate him? And I think she's still with Max later, 4 years later? And so it must mean that she likes him somewhat, or is, feeling safe enough and it's not as boring as she thought it was.
So let me ask a similar question that really is one of the themes of the show. Do you think that you could have, knowing that you're in a happy marriage and have been with Brandon for a very long time, do you think that you would be able to identify the red flags?
It's hard to say because when you're so young and your brain is still growing and you think you're seeing flags and you think it's hard to say, right? Because it's like hindsight's 2020, right? Like in the moment, you're like, this feels good. That doesn't feel good. But that feeling of like not feeling good, you just want to make it better. So it's like immediate gratification. Like he texts you, so you're texting him back, right? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I could or not. I mean, as an adult, I would say probably, but I'm much more aware now as an adult woman. But I think when I was 19, you want to see the best in people too. And you want to feel like people really love you and people care about you. And I think she thought all those things. I think she thought Steven felt all those things.
Have you seen that social media account of the guy who watches clips of couples talking and he has huge green and red flags? Like he runs across a field. And so I haven't seen it. A guy or girl, somebody will be saying something obviously disrespectful to their significant other. The most recent example that I saw was the girl said, if you don't make the shot, or if you make the shot in, you're going to have to propose to me, something like that. And he celebrates over the fact that they're never going to have to get married. And he runs across the field with
Oh my God.
and he sells red flag t-shirts. And it's the same thing. It'll be really affection ones where one of the partners will ask the other one a question, and they'll answer in the most beautiful way, and he'll run across the field with a huge flag. I'll tag you in it. I'll tag this person in it if this surfaces, because I think he's doing God's work. So let me put the question for a second. Now that we're older and have more perspective, we'll make hopefully new mistakes or repeat some of the old ones, hopefully not. What is your advice to somebody who's younger, or somebody who is dating, or maybe it could be about friendship or a toxic job? What is your advice to somebody on identifying red flags?
I would say to trust your gut. If you are feeling some sort of way, it's probably true, or at least somewhat true, and would definitely listen to yourself.
Yeah. I've said this before when we were talking about Mr. Darcy, and I think I'll say it again and again. I think the good testament is that somebody's words and actions align.
Yeah.
I've been asking a lot of questions. What do you have on your side? If not, I can always refer back to what I've got in my Rolodex, aka my ChatGPT research.
So, do we think that unlikable characters can be redeemable?
I sure as fuck hope so. Let me flip it back to you. I want to think for another second, but I think you probably have a point of view.
Well, I mean, I definitely do. It feels like in this season that they are not redeemable. Even like Evan, who made a mistake and still, like, in the end is marrying Bree. I guess I feel like he's redeemable, but nobody's perfect and we all make mistakes. I do think to some extent that I don't know that Steven will be better in the near future. If that, like, I'm wondering what season 2 is going to be like. Like, I don't even know, because I haven't read anything about the premise. So maybe his character, but I just can't imagine. I mean, I feel like he is just out for himself. And I think maybe it felt a little bit real, like at the end when he tells Lucy he loves her. But again, I think it's that trauma, connection, right? Like, because she knows everything about the accident with Macy. And so it is like this connection that they have. And Wrigley says something like, oh, you're not the same person. And so I think when he realizes that's right before they go to the party at the end, right? And so I was thinking that maybe he was starting to really love her, but then he realized what was happening and maybe took a step back. So again, though, I don't know that I feel like he will be a likable character. Like, I don't even think, because of his character, I don't even think that he is attractive. Like, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like I'm taking a step back. Like, he's a very, like, he's tall, he's athletic, he's got, like, kind of a cute face, but, like,
smart.
Yes, well, smart, yes, but, like, he does it in such a sly, like, I mean, he's very charming, but, like,
is that what the kids say?
Yeah. Like how you were talking about the interview, right, with the woman, for the law firm. I felt like, oh, this is going to go well, and then I was like, cringe, and I was like, oh, I can't even watch this. Like, he's just like, I mean, again, though, he got in his head, and I think that those are his insecurities. So, what do you think about it?
Yeah, after reflecting a little bit more about, can somebody who's unlikable eventually be likable, or are they redeemable? You brought up Evan, which is interesting. Evan, it was a one-time thing. We'll learn in season 2 if it's a repeat habit. What Evan also had the luxury of coming from a completely different childhood. You learn a little bit more about Evan, and I anticipate that in season 2 they're going to go deeper into some of those other characters and do some side quests, or at least what I hope, and some of the light reading that I've done has indicated that. But you know that Evan and Bree end up together, and I don't see Evan as having the same issues with manipulation. So that that's somebody who it might be easier for unless he has other transgressions or other mistakes that we need to revisit, right? Steven, it's repeated, and he knows it's very clear what he's doing. And I think, again, going back to his respect for Diana, what he likes about her is that she realizes that. They both realize that they're playing some sort of different game, and they've gone through different, different things together, because that's how she wins them back, right? She reminds them, I get it, I'm sure that she's sweet, but are you happier now than you were a year ago? Or how Steve and I would have known, wouldn't have thought that there were no other options available. And that's actually her manipulating a bit. They both know that they're doing that, whereas Lucy wants to see him as being different. And what's worse is I don't think Lucy has self-awareness of what she's doing, which is why I think Steven, if you have to stack rank, terrible human behaviors, he's extremely conscious of it. And Lucy's becoming more aware of it. But asking the existential question about if somebody can eventually be redeemable, they have to be willing to change their pattern. It's different if it's a one-time transgression versus somebody's aware of it and it's a constant pattern. And this is something that I really liked about what Kenyatta said in a previous episode is that person, I do think there's always going to be that version of you that lives inside of you, and you always have to choose to be the new person, right? I sometimes, when I argue with a family member, can instantly go back, especially when I'm sitting in my childhood home and, I get into it with a family member. I have to remember, I'm now in my 30s, I don't talk like that. I'm not somebody who yells anymore. So I do think that exists. It's just you have to consciously choose it every single day. I think anybody who's struggled with anything else that they've tried to outgrow, maybe at one point you weren't a gym goer. It doesn't have to be so deep all the time. Like maybe at one point a version of you wasn't a runner, wasn't a gym goer, or used to smoke. Like every single day you have to choose, no, this is my new identity. I'm now somebody who goes to the gym. I am now a runner. I am a non-smoker. And I don't know, for Steven, I no longer manipulate people. I no longer make totally
that's a character flaw for sure.
Okay, so let me ask you a question based off of that I did not have prepared. If you were Lucy and you were Steven, what affirmations would you say daily to be a better person? Let's go with Lucy first.
I'm not doing affirmations. All right, so for Lucy, I would say, why don't you go first? Because I need to think about this. I'm not sure.
Okay, you're going to do Steven. I will do Lucy. I would say I am somebody who prioritizes having people in my life where their words and their actions align. I only make choices that bring me to my greater good, my highest self. I only spend time with people who are willing to meet me when it comes to equal investment. Those are the initial ones without getting too specific. I am somebody who doesn't need to be around Steven DeMarco. but I'm also somebody who forgives, because I do think that if you look at the face that she makes when he ends up with Lydia at the end, you can tell it still stings. So it's like I release anybody from my life who no longer adds value, and you can tell it still hurts him.
Yeah.
Steven's affirmations.
Oh man, I think for Steven, he needs to believe that his inner child is taken care of. For sure. That he's good enough. He's good enough the way he is. He's good enough. Because I think that's the whole thing. I think he doesn't feel good enough. That's why he wants to be a lawyer. That's why he wants to, the status. Yeah, because of the way he grew up and the way he saw things. And I mean, he even tells Lucy, you brought this up earlier about the dating, right? Them going on dates, and he brings up the money situation. He's like, I spent my hard-earned money on taking you out, and that should mean something to you because money means something to me. So, yeah, I think I'm good enough.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we sometimes share our own anecdotes, and I remember being in, let's call it a toxic relationship, and that part stung while watching Steven, because I had somebody say to me, time's the only thing you can't get back. I spend the majority of my time with you. Like, that should mean something to you. So just separate money and time, which you could argue there's some overlap between those two things. And I remember thinking, like, yeah, this person, they do spend all of their time with me. But when you look at the bigger picture, you pay attention to the details that you want to pay attention to. And the other advice I would give to Lucy is, look at the full picture. And sometimes you have to rely on those closest to you that you love and trust to help you complete that full picture instead of believing just what you want to believe.
Well, I think part of the issue, though, is she doesn't trust anybody but herself. And I think to go back to, it's because of her mother, right? She obviously trusted her mother, and then she stopped trusting her mother because of what her mother did.
Yeah, and it had clear implications on her self-worth, because there was one thing that Diana said, which was really interesting, because Diana possessed self-respect, right? She said, she would not be in a public relationship with him, even though they were still seeing each other on the side, because she really valued also what her friends thought about her. And she said in one of the earlier episodes, I respect myself too much to be with somebody publicly who had publicly disrespected me. And that's another, not that I don't want to get into a game of comparing Lucy and Diana. And I think that's what in love triangles, a lot of people have a tendency to do. And that's something that was interesting, that Lucy hadn't learned that lesson yet about self-respect. And she had still had lessons to learn about both self-worth and self-respect. Which brings me to a question to you is...
Wait, can I add something really quick? Because I just thought of this. I feel like she did the same thing that Steven did to her, with the exception that I don't think they had the same chemistry, but her college boyfriend. Because her college boyfriend was obsessed with her. And I feel like she was sort of doing what Steven was doing to her.
Yeah. Yeah, because that was her way of taking her power back, was to essentially replicate what Steven was doing, right? When she said to him earlier on, I'm not hooking up with anybody else, and I'm thinking about getting on birth control. And that was another manipulation that I won't get into the details, that he was like, oh yeah, I'll be sure to give you a heads up. And her way of getting her power back was to essentially just behave the same way that Steven was behaving, because it was just a coping mechanism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions on your side?
No, I think that's it.
I have two more. Yeah, I have two more before we go into Truth or Dare. The first one is, since the show is called Tell Me Lies, I guess the question here is, who's more dangerous in a relationship? The person who lies or the person who believes the lie?
Ooh, I think in this case it would be the person who believes the lie. And I would say that because it's like you're missing the red flags, right? So you are putting yourself in a situation that you probably don't want to be in.
Yeah, I was trying to think of examples, and I didn't want to turn political. But let's say, a very dramatic example, a world leader or a dictator from whatever era you look at, they tell people lies like our society's better than their society, and people believe that. They're the ones who are going to act on it. I've never thought about it from that perspective. Yeah, that's why you have to be vigilant. Yeah. Well, before I go to my last question, I'll add in one more. Is there a lie that you told when you were young that you regret?
I usually, I don't really lie because I'm not good at it. So I don't know. I can't think of anything.
I remember lying when I was about 5, and I would say it was childhood imagination, but my mom picked me up from school, and I told this elaborate story about how we went to a field trip to the zoo, and I started describing it. I can't tell you why.
Storyteller? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a positive thing, though, right?
Yeah. I have a general rule. I hate lying for a myriad of reasons, and I hate being lied to. My mom, if we got caught in a lie, reprimanded to the extreme. It doesn't make me feel good. It eats at me. And I also consider somebody withholding information to be a lie, but I also recognize that there's a time and a place, right? And not everybody needs to know everything. My sister actually has a general rule about what you say. And I'm not sure where she got this from, but is it necessary? Is it kind? Is it true? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Determining when to say and who to say it to. I have a general rule that I prefer to be tactfully transparent. So I get accused of being diplomatic, or other folks would call it political correctness. I want to tell my truth, but I also want it to be kind. And if I don't have a way of doing that, then that's when I choose what timing, or if I choose not to say it. Because is it going to add value to that person? So do you have any rules around lying or truth telling? Like what's your white lie principle? If I was sick, would you tell me that I still look pretty?
I guess, yes. I guess we try, yeah.
You better still tell me I look pretty, Cynthia.
Of course. Well, I mean, I think that there is, white lies are not really, I guess it's lying. I don't know. I don't think of this as like, again, tactful. I don't know. I think that that's, the most important thing is being, considerate and thoughtful of other people. And I think that that's, I do think that, though, that people don't always want to hear the truth. So that's something. I think sometimes people they want to be heard, and that's it.
That's really true. Last question before Truth or Dare. I haven't picked my answer to Truth or Dare, but I'm leaning towards one answer. What do you think are the big lessons to learn from either reading this book, Tell Me Lies, or watching the show, knowing we haven't seen season 2 yet?
I think that the big lesson here is probably to accept what you've already done, and that it's okay to move on, and that it's okay. Like, we're not perfect. We make mistakes. And I think that that's a big part of this story, right? Accepting that you're not always going to be perfect, and you're not always going to make the best decisions, but that's how we learn, and that's okay.
I love that. My thought around the answer to the question, what can you learn from the show or book Tell Me Lies, includes recognizing red flags, what the impact to the people around you could be for deception, both self-deception and social deception, because Lucy deceived herself and Stephen was clearly deceiving others. There were points when Lucy was deceiving others. And that leads to what's the accountability in relationships, to the point that you just made around when do you tell the truth? At what point do you tell the truth? Are you somebody who can be willing to handle it the same way you can't handle like the truth? I just think of Jack Nicholson in the scene. And then, given that they keep doing this time back and forth from when they're in college, and you know that they're eventually going to be at Evan and Bree's wedding, what are the long-term consequences of the choices that you make and how it affects the people around you? Because you're seeing Wrigley and the lies that were told around Drew and what happened with the car accident with Stephen. This is related to the show. That's still affecting Wrigley. Like, he's drunk at that wedding and can't handle it. There's still tension between Pippa and Lucy because they weren't able to handle their relationship. Lydia ends up being with her ex-boyfriend. So I could go on and on about this. I think it's hard to watch, and it's cringeworthy, and it's the ick factor, because it's just like secondhand embarrassment for people that are making decisions that we know they shouldn't be making.
Well, this made me think of two things that you said. So the first one is talking about like how they're at the wedding, I think that one of the things I was thinking about is that they're in the present, right? They have every opportunity to make this different than the past. And I think that that's another thing to take away, is that, every day is a new start. And I think that this wedding is an opportunity for Lucy to do that, to move away from Stephen and let that go. And then the second thing is, Lucy says in the book, she says, people mess up. People are allowed to mess up. And I think that is kind of sums up my feelings about this book and what it's trying to say. Because you know how you brought up the question, Is it worse to believe the lie or to tell the lie? And I think that this brings that to the forefront, that either way, it's okay.
I love that. Any final questions on your side before we play, ironically, truth or dare, given we're talking about tell me lies?
Yes.
Have you decided on your truth or dare or trare?
I guess it's kind of a trare. I really, this last year, I've been really trying to live in the present. And I feel like this is sort of a message from this book that, you know, where all of your experience has led you to where you are, and it's okay to be there. And it's okay not to think about those things anymore, because how you were saying, we're new people, right? We've made these decisions for ourselves, and now we're moving forward. And so sort of a trare, sort of like still continuing on with this staying in the present, and I guess just staying with what I feel like who I am and where I want to be.
Yeah, I think based on what you said, and you brought this up a lot of different times, especially we had the red flag conversation. Therefore, my dare is going to be reminding myself to stay close to my intuition. It doesn't matter what pillar of my life that it is, like staying true to yourself. Because when you say tell me lies, you are saying I want to be deceived. And I really appreciated your response around you can usually sense it, right? If you feel safe. And while I do think there's moments that we should do things like that feel difficult for bravery, but when it comes to choosing the people that you surround yourself with, knowing we can't get time back, and the studies they've done around you are the person, like you spend like the top 5 people that you spend your time with, I think that we have to be more, and myself in particular, discerning about who those people are. And I would say there are a lot of people that we weren't good for each other, that were no longer in our lives, but you know, we're in our 30s. We have a lot of time left. And I think that we're going to interact with new people and have new opportunities. And I think that really staying close to my intuition and encouraging the folks around me to do the same thing, because I am an optimist. I do inherently believe that people are good, but that doesn't mean that I can do that, and I can still also be vetting people at the same time without mistrusting the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any final thoughts on your side?
No, I'm excited to watch the second season still. Even though season 1, second watch was cringe, I still want to watch the second season. I need to know what happens.
Cool. The roller coaster of Lucy Albright and Stephen DeMarco and Tell Me Lies. Let us know what you think of season 1, the book. If you end up watching season 2, thank you for watching and listening to this episode of Truth or Dare to Share. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
You're listening to Truth or Dare to Share by Ambitiously Intuitive.